Welcome to the Knowledge for Men show. Your life will never be the same.
Your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development.
I want to die empty of regret. I want to die empty of my best work. We don't understand who we are. Instead, we're living out somebody else's narrative.
What one man can do, another man can do. If it's been done, it can be done again.
Being yourself and being your truest, most authentic self in every moment. If it scares you or makes you a little afraid, do it. Follow your heart and your gut.
The first stage, I think, is finding you, like finding out who I am today.
Stuff will not work. You will have things that fail. Success is when you're a happy, fulfilled person. How do you define success?
It's your life, and you are the creator of the movie script that is your life story.
The father of personal development, Jim Rohn, said it best. You are the average of the 5 people you spend your most time with. And so I've created a mastermind community called the Lion's Den around this idea that if you are surrounded by high-performing people and you have consistent education and training, then you will succeed in life and as a man. Check out kfmlion.com to learn how the Lion's Den can take your life, relationships, and business to the next level. Again, that's kfmlion.com. All right, guys, welcome to the show. I'm here with Sam Morris, the founder of Zen Warrior Training. We're in for a treat here. We got an incredible individual. I'm not gonna tease you too much with an introduction. I just want to hear it from him himself. So, Sam, happy to have you on the show.
Thank you, Aaron. Drew, I love this show, and I love what you're doing for men. I think this is an incredibly empowering show that you've got going here.
All right, I'm excited. So let's start off with a favorite success quote of yours or some sort of saying that you've lived by, and then go ahead and explain to the audience why you chose that.
Absolutely. The quote that I chose is from John Wooden, who was the UCLA basketball head coach between 1963 and 1975. This guy led UCLA to winning 10 championships in just 12 years. I mean, just an absolutely phenomenal guy and an absolutely phenomenal leader. And a quote from him that I really like is, "Success is peace of mind, which is a direct result of self-satisfaction in knowing you did your best to become the best you are capable of becoming." So I really love how he points out success is peace of mind. It's not like 2 nice cars and a house in the hills or, any kind of material sort of lifestyle or anything like that. It's peace of mind that comes from that fulfillment of knowing that you did your best, trying to become the best you were capable of becoming. I just think it's an awesome quote, and I live by that myself.
Yeah, I'm trying to digress what was said, and I think that is really powerful because I think so many men, we can get caught up in maybe it's our egos, we can get caught up in trying to get more and trying to get more and more without really thinking about ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we stand back and this is what I try to teach with Zen Warrior Training is standing back from the entire situation, from your ego, looking at where you want to go in terms of a bigger vision than just you. And I feel like that, to me, is the most crucial and essential way to be able to live a life of value and of pleasure, and where you can really feel like you're fully integrated with the world that you're living in.
This is epic. All right, so kind of like talking about finding something and doing something that's higher than yourself.
Absolutely. And the way that I teach that is I teach it through meditation, and I teach it through principles and values that are important to the individual. I never try to project my ideas of what's valuable to the person that I'm working with. I always look for what's valuable to them, what's really valuable, and what really speaks to them as an individual. What is going to make their soul feel like it's on fire, and what is going to make them wake up with passion every day. And so I hone in on that, and I try to point out any kind of blind spots that might be in the way of that person seeing that unique blueprint that they've got that is just basically their potential. Everyone has a blueprint that is the kind of conditioned beliefs and thought patterns that they've been sort of adopted over the course of the years. And some of that stuff works and some of that stuff is not going to work in terms of becoming a successful and empowered individual. So I work on identifying exactly where the blueprint is. And if the blueprint needs to be changed in order to become more successful and really feel like your soul is on fire on a daily basis, then I work on helping them change it. And that can be done through meditation and coaching, training, etc.
When you say that soul is on fire, that really just like gives me like it's like when you're in a hospital bed and they put those things together and then they shock your heart. It's like, that's what, when you said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like it just hits my heart. And
totally.
All right, let's put the brakes on this part right here, and let's kind of go into, let's back step a few. And how did you get to this point? Like, how does an everyday guy get to this level of self-mastery that you're at, and where you're coaching guys and you give classes to men on your practice of Zen warrior training? So like, what happens? What take us to your story here?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it will help to go back to 15 years ago in 1999. At the time, I was just turned 24 in 99, and I had just finished leading a bicycling trip for 9 teenagers across the U.S. And I was in the best shape of my life. We went unsupported. I had probably like 85 pounds of gear on my bike. I had to run up and down the line, bike up and down the line to sort of make sure everyone was following by the road rules that we had established. So I was riding like even more than everyone else was. We were camping every night, cooking all our own food. And it was like the peak of my physical prowess and, at the time, my mental ability to be able to handle a lot of challenge. And we went from Seattle to New Jersey. And at the end of that summer, I remember thinking, oh my God, I cannot imagine anything more challenging than what I've just been through. And I tell you, the physical part was a big part of it, but one of the hardest parts about it was really keeping the esteem and the attitudes of the 9 teenagers really strong to be able to do it. And so I was like, wow, I just can't imagine anything more difficult than what I've just been through. Well, fast forward about 2.5 months, and on November 9th of 1999, I was celebrating a friend's birthday. And he and I decided to go out to a bar together, and he had another friend whom I just met that day who he asked to drive. And the guy had an old 73 Nova, and I didn't really think anything of it. I just got in the back seat, and we started off down the road. We were going to a place just a few miles away, so I thought, no big deal. I didn't even really think of anything of it, but the guy had been drinking a bit. And as we take off, we just burn out through the parking lot, run over a curb. I can smell the tires burning against the wheel well of the car. And I'm like, oh man, oh no. And it just felt like bad news. My intuition was just like, this is not good right now. And as we take off down the road, he puts on Rage Against the Machine, and he's blasting the music, and I'm just yelling. I'm going, hey, let's go to this place closer by, because I'm just getting this really bad feeling about that evening. And so I was making it known that I wanted to stop at this place closer by rather than go to a place that was several miles away. And he didn't stop, and we ended up turning down a dirt road. Actually, it was a paved road that turned into a gravel road. And right after it turned into a gravel road, there were several hairpin turns. And we hit those hairpin turns probably going, I don't know, somewhere between 50 and 60 miles an hour. Driver lost control of the car. It fishtailed one way, and then it fishtailed back another way. And then it went flying into the woods. And where I was in the back seat, I just was tossed, because there's no seatbelt. I was tossed from the passenger side to the driver's side. My body slammed into the side where the impact happened. And in that moment, it was just like, boom. I had maintained my consciousness, but I knew that I was paralyzed from the waist down. And I flopped back into the middle of the back seat, and I couldn't feel anything from my navel down. And I remember the driver saying, is everyone okay? And I was like, no, everyone's definitely not okay. So I end up going and having a spinal fusion to put me back together, and basically just being in shock about the whole thing. It's hard to describe the kind of mental state that I went through, but I was on morphine for about a week, and that helped with the emotional pain from what had just happened. I basically just lost my entire livelihood. Being an outdoor leader, I could no longer use my legs when my legs were a huge part of my life. I mean, I was a bicyclist, I was an expert snowboarder, I was an expert skier, I hiked every day. Like, my legs were my life. At least that's what it felt like. So losing my ability to not only walk, but losing my bowel function, my bladder function, losing my sexual function, it was like I had to really there was basically two roads. I either had to accept what was in whatever way I could, or fight it. And the idea of fighting it was just not an option. So I basically had to really let go of my entire identity and really let go of the idea that, hey, I might not ever be able to have normal sex again. I might not ever be able to feel my bladder and my bowels again. Just let go of all of that stuff and move on. And that's not something that was necessarily easy to do. It involved like incremental change of learning to accept that over the course of a number of years. Now, one of the most pivotal moments for me was when I moved to LA to work with a movement therapist, not a physical therapist, but a movement therapist, someone who really understood the internal workings of the body and consciousness and awareness. And I won't go into that too much, but the study of like learning to identify with my body in an entirely new way under the guidance of this incredible movement therapist allowed me to realize that while my legs might be lacking sensation and motor function, and while my bladder and bowels and my cock might be lacking sensation and function, I still was not paralyzed because my life was not paralyzed. And I realized actually that it's an interesting thing, because I say this to every group that I work with. Paralysis is just a word. And basically, we all have places in our lives where we're stuck and we feel like we can't move on. And that's just as real as we make it or not make it. So I had to get over the idea that I was actually paralyzed and really move on in terms of, hey, look at all the things that I can do. Look at all the things that I'm totally capable of doing. And a few years later, that took on yet another level of challenge, because I spent cumulatively over 2 years lying flat on my back in hospital beds and from pressure sores. And I had to have a number of surgeries for pressure sores, which are sores that people in wheelchairs can develop because of the lack of sensation in their muscle tissue. So you can break down on your butt tissue, and you also have atrophied muscles there as well. So I spent like 2 years total. Once it was 7.5 months without leaving a hospital bed. That was the longest period of time I went for one stretch without even being able to sit up. So that started to really put things in perspective. At that point, I was like, wow, I can't wait to get back in my wheelchair. I mean, when it's like the worse things get, the better things can appear, where it's like incrementally better than where you're at currently. So I would like dream of getting back in my wheelchair. I was so psyched for the day where I could get back in my chair. And so I wasn't able to continue to do the movement therapy that I had been learning, that I moved to LA to learn. But what I was able to do was I was able to really just go deep inside myself and really learn, like really teach myself meditation and really like hone in on that art. And so I was really able to start to more and more and more just witness my experience as not something that was like personally happening to me, but just an experience. And the question of why me, which would come up over and over and over again, obviously for obvious reasons, and it comes up to everyone for various reasons. The question of why me began to be replaced with why not? Who's to say that I don't necessarily deserve a free card in this situation? I don't, nothing says that I inherently get to live a life of comfort and free of pain and suffering. And so I just kind of learned to start to embrace it more and more and more. And the more I embraced it, the more I found that I was able to really access this level of joy that was beyond just temporary happiness. It was like this sort of feeling of empowerment, like really strong empowerment, where I suddenly realized more and more that I wasn't being affected by the world the way that I used to be. I wasn't subject to the same kinds of ups and downs that I used to be, because I would go underneath it all. I would be in a state of being, a state of consciousness where I was underneath the challenge, and where I was basically, or I was underneath is one way of putting it, or I might put it in terms of being like behind the challenge, just witnessing the challenge, but not being in the challenge, not being like basically diving beneath the waves rather than being up trying to catch air, catch my breath between the waves and then getting hammered by another and another and another. Like instead I learned to either ride the waves or go underneath the waves so I wouldn't be constantly getting hammered by the circumstances of my own life.
I'm just I was like speechless for a moment, because your story is just so, it just seems like you've overcome, and to hear you now, it's like you have this positive, lively, I could feel it through the tone of your voice, and it's clear that the path to recovery is, you've gone through it, and man, you've overcome something and you have such a great attitude on life that it's just like just listening to you is the lesson. Like I don't have
Thank you.
I don't have to really ask you. It's like just listening to you. The lesson is in your voice. Like you could be talking about like your favorite ice cream, and I would still be like, wow, like how is he able to do that? That's incredible.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I get that I really, basically most of what I do when I work with clients is teaching attitude training. But attitude is a really hard thing to work with, because people sort of feel like they have the attitudes they have for a reason. And they feel, I think oftentimes, like certain kind of negative attitudes are justified in certain situations and that kind of thing. But really, when you open up to a larger perspective, and you also live within, what I do is I constantly remind myself of the principles and values that are really important to me. And I have 7 principles, which I can go into later and describe in more detail. But I look at the principles that are really important to me in order to live an empowered life. And if I'm in a negative mindset about one of those principles, about something that's going on, something that I feel that like is happening to me, I look at how in alignment I am with the principles that are actually important to me. And then once I kind of check in with myself about that, then I go, oh, well, there's this thing that I have decided is really important to me, and I'm actually living outside of integrity with my own principle. And so then it's like a check-in mechanism that I've created for myself, and then I've created to teach other people too, because I feel like these 7 principles are like the key to being able to live a successful and empowered life. And I always come back to them, because it's like if you live within these principles on a regular basis, and if you get the kind of training and coaching to be able to hold yourself accountable to these principles, it's like you're on fire. You're totally on fire.
Yeah, what are the
what are the principles? Yes,
You
exactly.
just
I figured now it is time to describe in more detail. So the first principle is be in the now moment. Don't get caught up in thinking about the past and thinking about the future. Anxieties about the future are not going to serve you. Issues related to like how someone treated you in the past or whatever are not going to serve you. In fact, one of the first things that I did after my accident happened was I forgave the driver. And granted, it was not easy to do. And the thing is I didn't forgive him for him. I forgave him for myself because I knew that I could not hold on to that kind of resentment and live a good life. Like I knew that I was going to be miserable if I was holding on to resentment to the guy who caused my injury. So basically, I let go of the past. And the more I've learned to let go of the past in terms, and this has been 15 years now, so I've had a lot of experience in letting go. But there's never a moment that I go through life where I wouldn't like to have my walking back or my bladder function, bowel function, and sexual function back. But I've not only learned to live with them, I've actually learned to turn those challenges into opportunities to be able to experience myself from a broader perspective than what those various different functions made me feel good about or whatever. So I'm always like, how can I live in the now moment? If I get caught up with anxiety about the future, I'm dead to myself, basically. I've got no creative mind if I do that. I won't be able to actually make the right kind of decision in the moment if I'm coming from anxiety. And if I'm coming from any kind of feelings of, oh man, in the past, this would have been different. And oh man, I was so capable before. And now, I'm like, no, that does not work. So I look at what I can do right now. And so it's really essential for me to follow that principle as much as I'm able to do. And all of these principles are like lifetimes of practice to be able to do these really, really well. The second principle is be accountable. So when I say be accountable, basically be responsible for all of your actions and all of your feelings. Like I try to live by this all the time. Like I don't want to feel like someone did something to me and then blame them for doing something to me. In every situation where something happens to me, and granted, things happen to me, of course, but as soon as they happen, well, I look at what part I played in it. If someone treats me in a way that's where they totally don't see me or it's kind of offensive or something like that, first I look at, well, where are they coming from? Where am I coming from? And it's very likely that they don't see who I am as an individual and they don't understand me. And people have their own dysfunctions. So I just try not to take that stuff personally. If I'm blaming people or if I'm getting angry at people for things that I don't like, basically what I'm doing is I'm saying I don't have the power to be able to handle this situation. I'm giving away my power by saying I don't have that power, basically. And so if I own the situation, if I can totally own what is happening to me, own the feeling, own my actions, and take full accountability for everything I do, then I can actually own that I am in charge of myself. And so this is like, these principles are for taking full charge of your own self so that you can't be knocked around by the world so much. Number 3 principle is persevere. And I've had to do a whole lot of that, especially since my injury happened, as you can tell from this story that I just told you. It's when you get knocked down, just keep on keeping on. And life is one thing after another that we have to learn to persevere through. The next principle is life is an adventure. So I don't treat life like it's an ordeal. I treat it like it's an adventure and like it's a game. And it's like an adventure to master. And I know that as I go through different levels of life, whenever I get through one level, it's kind of, if you look at a video game analogy, When you get through the first level, the second level is both more complicated and more fun. And so you're always trying to get to that second level because you know that it's going to be more complicated and more fun. And that third level is going to be more complicated and more fun than that. So life is like a game in that sense if you choose to make it like that. Now, it takes really choosing to focus on life as an adventure or as a game to be able to see it that way. And that's a choice that one needs to make over and over and over again each day and each moment. And by doing so, you can get to new levels, which are both more complicated and more fun. The next principle is be real. And this is just, I think this is an obvious one. And, it just makes sense. You got to be real in order to be able to live with any of these other principles anyway. You got to be able to be real with yourself, and you've got to be able to be real with others. And this does not always mean like calling out people where you don't like them or whatever. This is not about judgments or anything like that, or like criticism of people. This is just about being real with yourself, being real with your own thoughts, being real with your own feelings, and just not living in any kind of fake way at all. It's the reason being because it's extremely empowering to be as real as possible.
Would you say that like when you're completely real with yourself and others, is this like a form, or is this another way of saying like self-mastery?
Yeah, well, self-mastery comes through basically an honest reflection of yourself at all times. And so what I've discovered through my own practice of meditation and self-awareness is that it requires deeper levels of honesty with yourself to be able to get to your next level on a regular basis. So I feel like a year from now, I'm going to be honest with myself in ways that I don't even know that are possible yet. Because, and 10 years from now, there's going to be a level of honesty and integration with myself that I don't have no idea is possible yet. So I just love looking at life as basically, it's like peeling off the layers of an onion. And the idea is you want to get to the core of that onion, where it's like your real, raw, and authentic self, it can really shine. Or like the heart of an artichoke or whatever, use whatever analogy you want. But it's like, it's underneath all of those ideas of who we are that aren't really real, that are just ideas or thought patterns that don't really have any kind of realness at all. They're not really authentic thought patterns. We just pick them up along the way. It's like peeling off those layers and getting down to the heart of who you actually are is like the most empowering thing that you possibly can do, in my experience, because it's like, along with that level of realness and rawness comes extraordinary perspective. It's like this perspective where you can just own your entire experience and have access to way more of a unique intelligence that was brought here specifically for your life. And this is the kind of thing that you have to dig deep to be able to find the unique blueprint that is you, that is your part in this world. And it requires a lot of removing of other stuff that doesn't serve you, which actually leads to my next principle, which is move on and let go. So whenever you're in a situation where you feel like whatever you're thinking of or whatever you're feeling or whatever you're doing is not serving you, your highest potential, move on and let go. And that doesn't mean like, necessarily like leave your job and search for one that's more aligned with, what you really want to do or whatever, maybe so or maybe not. Maybe it's just like move on and let go from the fact that you'll never be able to control your coworkers to be able to have them treat you in a way that you want to be treated. That might never happen. And it might be the best job for you. So just move on from the feeling and just be willing to empower yourself to live at your highest potential, no matter how people treat you or no matter what the world looks like around you, because it's really ultimately all up to you to be able to live life through the reality that you want to see for yourself. And the seventh and final principle is serve the greater good. And I'm not necessarily talking about that in a way, some people are going to make momentous changes in the world, and that's awesome. But serving the greater good could be just something as simple as serving the greater good of your own integrity, serving the greater good of your relationship with your partner, your spouse, your family, or whatever. Just serving some kind of good that's greater than just your ego's fascinations. So those seven principles, I find there's only seven of them because I figured that was a good number to be able to remember on a regular basis. Like I can repeat these in the back of my mind unconsciously without even thinking about it. So there's not like 46 principles. We could break it down and make all kinds of principles if we wanted to. But by breaking them down into seven principles, I'm able to actually look at myself and how I'm in relationship with those principles on a moment by moment basis, and just check in with myself. Like those are the principles that I know will lead to a more and more empowered life. And so those are the ones that I chose to adopt.
If you were to have, let's say, two more principles, what would they be?
Laugh a lot would be one of them.
That's a good one.
It's like I find that a good sense of, they say laughter is the best medicine. I'm laughing constantly about the way that life is. And if you can laugh in the midst of extraordinary challenge, then it is literally the most empowering thing that you can do for yourself. Like if you can find the humor, no matter how difficult things get, and that's not always easy to do, but if you can do it, you will undoubtedly be able to start to move on from whatever it was that was bothering you or challenging you. So laughing a lot would be an eighth principle. Let me see, what would a ninth principle be? Stillness. Like there's a level of stillness that I find is required in order to do these things. And what I mean by stillness is it's like this internal stillness. I go to a place in my awareness and my consciousness where it's the part of me that has always existed. It's the part of me that feels more or less eternal. It's the part of me where I'm like, oh yeah, I've been this guy since I was born, and I'll be this same guy when I die. And I go into that place inside myself, and it's this very still place of awareness where the random goings-ons of the world don't really affect me that much if I stay in that stillness, in that state of mind. And then I find that I can function really, really, really effectively from that place of stillness. And this is part of what I train other people to do too. This is like where Zen warrior training is kind of like Jedi training, because it really requires going inside a place in your consciousness where you are just watching the world from a witness perspective. And because you're watching the world from such a deep place inside yourself, you're able to take appropriate action at any given time rather than kind of be knocked around by the world and thinking all kinds of thoughts that are not really all that useful.
The 9 principles.
Yeah.
I want to now talk about what does it mean to be an authentic man? How does this help a man, and how do you get to that point?
Well, being authentic to me means really living in integrity with what's truly important. And that's a process that I think it takes a long time for a lot of people to develop a sense of what's really important. But And for me, I think part of that was the challenges that I've been through kind of forced me into seeing what's really important. But I don't necessarily think that one needs to be paraplegic to be able to be, be living authentically. I think it's basically just living in strong integrity with your own personal values and then sharing those personal values with others and really living from that place at all times.
Right. So an example is like you have your 7 or, now the 9 principles, and living your life according to those values and principles versus like, let's say you're doing the opposite. You're just living in the past. You weren't holding yourself accountable. You weren't leaving your home. You weren't living, a life of adventure. So you're out of congruence with your own personal values.
Exactly. So everyone's going to have various, there are going to be different value systems for different people. And there is some overlap, I feel like, in terms of living with values which are consistent with our culture as well. So there's a little of both. Like there's a certain amount of where these principles are kind of up to you to decide what's important to you. But I wouldn't have come up with my own principles if it wasn't for the fact that I'm a member of our culture. I'm a member of our society. Like I see what's important with myself in relationship with others, basically. So these are kind of universal values and principles as well. And I just have kind of identified, you can't live in empowerment with just yourself. That will never happen. No one will simply live in empowerment in relationship with themselves only. You have to live in, like, empowered living really means you're living empowerment with your relationship with those around you and with society as a whole. And that's part of how you serve the greater good, is you're living in integrity with values which are really consistent and congruent with what's important for the world.
Right. I think this kind of leads to the next question is like, I think what holds back a lot of guys from doing what they want to do or from being who they want to be is they have this baggage of being a victim. And so my question is like, how can guys remove that victim mentality?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a really good question. And that happens to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we all have periods of life or things that we go through which are going to create that victim mentality. And some people will stay in that victim mentality for their entire lives. Some people have it so ingrained in their minds that they are victims, and maybe they inherited that from their parents or the people they grew up around, or maybe they just picked that up in some way from something, who knows. But there's going to be a lot of people who never get past the victim mentality. And for the people who do, it really takes taking a certain amount of initiative in seeing, first you have to recognize that you're in a victim mentality. That's really hard for people who are victims to actually go, wow, I'm actually in a victim mentality. I feel like a victim. Most victims will never recognize that. So it takes seeing that and having a little bit of perspective that you want to actually make the change to begin with and start to live a more empowered life. And then I think it takes regular disciplined action to be able to get outside of the victim mentality. And I can train people how to do that through a step-by-step process of learning to recognize what is actually true versus what they think is true, and how the challenges that they have actually faced actually can be seen from a larger perspective as something that can help them to grow and to empower them. Oftentimes, it's the challenge that people get stuck in, and then they don't see the opportunity for growth within the challenge. And that's what creates that victim mentality. If everyone was to look at their challenges and go, oh, okay, well, there's an opportunity for growth, whoa, we would live in an entirely different world. It would be crazy different, because there's all of this wasted opportunity that comes through these challenges where people get stuck. So to answer your question, it all depends on the individual, and some people will never get outside of the victim mentality. And for those who can see it enough, and who wish to have someone help them to, someone who's compassionate towards it, who's not judging them for the victim mentality, who's not criticizing them about the victim mentality, but can really compassionately hold space for them and help them to gradually get outside of that, then that's the way to do it.
So what I'm getting from this is learning how to look at obstacles not as your enemy, but as kind of like your greatest ally on the journey.
Totally. Absolutely. That's absolutely the way that I look at life. I mean, I take all of my obstacles these days, and when my obstacles come up, when my challenges come up, it's not like there's this natural, oh, cool, another obstacle, another challenge. No, I mean, my initial response is, oh man, another challenge that, another thing that feels like it's holding me back, or whatever. And there's that initial irritation with it. And so it's not like, I don't think one ever gets full mastery over that, because the challenge just inherently has that quality to it. But then as soon as that happens, I can digest that feeling really quickly. Basically, I have the feeling, and then I go, oh, okay, well, I had that feeling. I got frustrated. Something came up. I didn't like it. What am I going to do with it? What am I going to do with that now? And the what am I going to do with it is the beginning of turning that challenge into an opportunity. And every single challenge that I've had ultimately has turned into an opportunity for me, including the 2 years of lying in hospital beds. Like, when I was going through all that stuff, it seemed like, oh my God, why is this happening to me? But like, looking back on that now, I look at it and I go, oh, wow, it all served a purpose. Like, I would not be able to do Zen warrior training. I would not be able to lead this program, which has a powerful effect on people's lives. I would not be able to do that if I'd not been through those challenges.
Wow. This is good. Let's dive into now the knowledge round. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions. So Sam, are you ready for the knowledge round?
Absolutely.
Do you feel stuck, alone, or like you're not getting the type of results you think you deserve? You put in all the hard work in your life, relationships, and business, but things just aren't getting any better? I've been there. That's how I started. That's where I was. I kept trying to improve my life, but nothing just seemed to give. I started to think that personal development was a joke. I felt like every month I was in the same place I was the previous month. But then I found something that just worked. I grew, my business grew, my relationships flourished, and everything around me just started to click. People started respecting me more, and I finally felt like I was becoming the man I wanted to be. I created a program to help guys get the same results in their life. Check out kfmline.com to learn how the Lion's Den can radically transform your life. Again, that's kfmline.com. Welcome to the Knowledge Round, where the guests will be asked rapid-fire questions to give the audience invaluable pieces of wisdom to help transform their lives. Starting in 3, 2, 1, showtime. The first question I have for you, Sam, is what advice would you give to someone who's feeling kind of lost or unsure of their purpose in life?
That's a great question. I would say, first of all, no. Just have faith that there is a purpose. And by having faith, I don't mean you have to subscribe to any kind of religion or outside belief system, but just know that there is a purpose, and that purpose has to be your choice. And I always look at life like this. It's like we have the freedom of choice when challenges come up or when we don't feel we have a purpose, in order to feel empowered that we've created our own purpose.
Wow. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So, this gets deeply philosophical and so forth, and some people might, with religious backgrounds or so forth, might argue. But the way I look at purpose is, life inherently is meaningless so that we may have the opportunity to create our own meaning. Basically, we get to play God. We get to create our own meaning. And how incredibly empowering is that?
That's a whole nother podcast interview. That's really good. And I could see how that could be controversial, but I accept it. I think that's a very powerful mindset and outlook on life.
Yeah, the way I look at it is, it's like People always are looking at, well, is there divine will or is there free will? And it's like the two are not opposed to each other. Free will and divine will are part of the same will. And so my goal in life is to operate from a place where I can get more and more and more aligned with myself so that free will and divine will are the exact same thing.
So taking 100% responsibility over your life and your future, is that the direction?
Absolutely. That's a big part of it.
All right. And next question here is, what was holding you back from becoming the man you are now today?
That's a great question as well. I would say trying to push away certain experiences rather than welcome every experience.
Yeah, can you say that one more time?
Sure. Trying to push away certain experiences rather than welcoming every experience.
Wow. It's not embracing what you're given.
Exactly. If you try to push away, you actually can't push away an experience. You can try to, but that's just the mind creating this attempt to push away an experience. So you, on some level, you just have to embrace the experience that you're having in order to be able to get what there is to be learned and experienced through the experience.
All right.
Every experience has value.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's, so then it comes down to perspective. It's like, what perspective, what hat are you wearing?
Exactly. So it comes back to creating meaning for yourself, which is where you get the power of creating your own life.
I love this. And can you name a person who's had a tremendous impact on your life, like a mentor? Can you share a light bulb moment with us that you guys have shared together?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll mention the movement teacher that I came out to LA to study with. Her name was Emily Conrad. She died earlier this year in April at the age of 79. And she was an extraordinary woman. And she was a fierce soul and fighter who had been through a lot and who discovered extraordinary things about the body and about movement that no other teacher that I know of knew anything about. And she founded a company called Continuum Movement back in the 60s and taught until just a few months before she died. And it was the bit that I brought up earlier in the interview where she said, paralysis is just a word. And that really stuck with me for forever. I mean, that's basically the foundation of what I do with Zen Warrior Training. I look at anywhere where anyone is stuck, and it's like, hey, you've only created it through a thought. You've created where you're stuck through a thought or through a belief, and you can create a new blueprint for yourself. And so my relationship with her was ongoing and extraordinary, and I learned so much from her, both psychologically and in terms of my relationship with my body, being able to heal from the trauma of the injury and feel like I have a whole body rather than a functional half and a non-functional half. But that was kind of the main gist of what we would always work with. That was the foundation that really helped me to move on and feel empowered.
That's just an incredible gift to have. And I think because you can take that and apply it to any, in terms of like the paralysis is just a word. So whatever someone has, it could be chronic pain, chronic pain is just a word. I think it's very liberating.
Right. Reality is simply the ideas and belief systems and thoughts and values and principles that we see the world. It's that lens through which we see the world. There is no reality. There's only the conditioned reality that we have taught ourselves to see and that we've picked up from others. But when people talk about reality like it's this static, serious thing, it's not. It's however we perceive the world.
This is good. Now, a man like yourself, you read all the time. I can only even begin to imagine the amount of books that you've read. So, let's go into, what are your two or three most influential books that you've read that have helped you, aided you on your journey, and why?
That's a great question too. I'm reading one right now that I really like. It's not necessarily one of my absolute all-time favorites, but I really like it because I feel like it's really good for where we are as a society right now, and for especially for people who are operating their own businesses or who are trying to function better within the business that they are in. It's called Conscious Business by Fred Kaufman. And he uses a lot of these same principles that I talk about, and more specifically, the accountability part. And he talks about how businesses, by adopting a real environment of accountability where people take personal accountability for every part that they are having in the dynamic in their office or in their business, can really empower their business way, way more, because there's all this, in a typical business, there's tons of blame that gets thrown around from person to person, and no one wants to be able to own their part in what's going on. But by people not owning their part, it just creates kind of a sleazy environment. And like, that environment can be cleaned up so much by people having better relationships. And people having better relationships, in order to do that, people need to take ownership of their own part in the dynamics that are going on in the business. And so Conscious Business, I think it speaks very well about what I'm hoping to see more and more businesses adopt. And as I work with businesses with Zen Warrior training, this is exactly the type of thing that I'm working with, is how to adopt these principles. And it can also be, this can apply to family or whatever. Accountability is so key. And he talks about how accountability and freedom are two sides of the same coin. If you can't have full accountability for yourself, you'll never have a personal freedom. You'll always be blaming some person for how you feel. So that's one book that I really like. Let me see. I'm taking a look over at my library right now and looking at some other ones.
You're cheating. What's on the top of your head?
There's one by Osho.
Right. Okay.
Who was the mystic. Very controversial guy, but I like a lot of his work. And it's called Love, Freedom, and Aloneness. And I really like that one a lot. Basically, it's about finding love in yourself, finding love in nature, finding your love in pure consciousness, rather than thinking that love is something that you can find outside of yourself, and really getting clear that there's aloneness and then there's loneliness. Loneliness is having expectations that things should be different and that you feel lonely. Whereas aloneness, it means really a place of really deep satisfaction in yourself, a deep peace within yourself. And so that's a really incredible book, Love, Freedom, and Aloneness. And as my third one, I will choose Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. It's basically about the way that our culture has lived under a rule of thinking for the past 10,000 years or so, where we are somehow above every other thing on the planet, and we can do with the planet whatever we choose, and how that mentality can only go on so long before having dire consequences, some of which we see today as global warming accelerates, and how in order for people to really move on from the situation becoming more dire than we can handle, what we need to do is move on from a mentality of being takers, from taking of each other and taking from the planet, and being leavers, people who leave something behind, who really work on changing our entire perspective to be able to look at our values in relationship with the entire globe and with every other person on this planet, and really leave value behind rather than just take for ourselves.
Oh, I added that book on my wish list. Now, the next question that I have for you is more of a scenario. I ask all the guests. It's kind of it either upsets you or you don't want to answer it. But the scenario is you have 60 seconds with your 20-year-old self. What would you tell them to do?
Wow, that's a really good question. I've never thought about that before, because what I've never thought about is, hey, when I was 20, I was still at the I was still at the peak of my life physically and so forth. And would I say, hey, don't get into the car that night, don't get into that accident, or would I not interfere with that? So that brings up like a very intense question for me. Like, I actually know that my impact on the world is able to be stronger because of all of the challenges that I've been through after my accident. So would I warn my 20-year-old self that my 24-year-old self would become paraplegic? I don't know. I don't know if I would do that or not. But one thing that I would tell my 20-year-old self is, hey, man, take it easy on the bomb hits.
That was the last thing that I was expecting to hear. Okay. That's hilarious.
Yeah. Yeah. I was pretty excited at the time about the ganja.
All right, we'll leave it at that. I mean, you've already dropped so many knowledge, bombs here. So that's honestly, that's one of the funniest responses I've ever had on that question. I've had quite a few pretty out there questions, but I was expecting like a whole nother. I was expecting the 10th principle to come out or something. That was really good. That made my month.
Okay, good.
Now, we'll just conclude here with the knowledge round and just kind of reflecting at the lessons you've learned on your journey, and maybe just a little summary of some of the principles that we've talked about here. But what would be your philosophy on like life and just what it means to be a man?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Life is an adventure if you choose for it to be. And in order for it to be an adventure, and it's a choose your own adventure to a large degree, in order for it to be an adventure, you need to be continually having that attitude towards it. So no matter how serious things get, no matter how challenging things get, really look at what kind of adventure you want to create for yourself. And know that part of that is what you create, and part of that is what comes in that is a natural result of you having created that particular adventure. So what seems like it happens to you can always be in the context of what adventure you've chosen for yourself.
All right. I was just letting that settle in there. That's going to conclude and wrap up the knowledge round there. So going into the outro here. So let's look at what's exciting you today. Like what's getting you out of bed in the morning other than maybe coffee?
Yeah. What's getting me out of bed this morning is there's major stuff happening in the world that is really absolutely incredible to see. I was just moments before we began just looking at this incredible video on YouTube of this guy. I want to find his name. He had just developed this prosthetic hand, and he's only 19 years old. And now he's sharing the information open source with the world. And his name is Easton LaChapelle. And the video is on Uprocks. It's called Meet the Teenager Trying to Change the World. There's people out there right now who are going to change the world in massive ways, and they are using the existing technology and using the existing resources they have to be able to take a really proactive approach in creating major change. And this is what I am all about. This is why Zen Warrior Training exists, is to be able to show people how they too can change the world in whatever way they envision. And it's just about taking the incremental steps needed to be able to make that change and really living in accordance with what's really important to you.
That's insane. I'm gonna have to check out that video. I'll maybe in the blog post I'll add it in there. That's really interesting. Go ahead and give yourself a plug on how my audience can follow up with you, any social media, your website.
Absolutely. My website is www.zenwarriortraining.com. I have a special specifically for Knowledge for Men listeners, I should say. It's a 6-pack special, 6 private lessons, an hour long in length. I'm offering 25% off for anyone who wants to work privately with me until I no longer can accept new clients because of time limitations. So anyone who hears this podcast, you can get a 6-pack special of 6 private sessions for 25% off, unique to people listening to this podcast. I also have bi-weekly classes in Santa Monica, California. They happen every second and fourth Friday of every month from 7 to 9 p.m. And it's at the Continuum Studio, which is 1629 18th Street in Santa Monica. And once a month, I also offer a special Zen for Men class. It tends to happen on a Saturday around the 3rd Saturday of the month. You can get all of that information on ZenWarriorTraining.com. The Zen for Men class is really fantastic because it's a group of people getting together and really helping to empower each other's lives to live their lives to their highest level of potential. But I really encourage your listeners to check out that offer for 25% off on the privates, because that's really the way that I can best focus on helping you to identify the life that you want to live and how to get there.
Sam, thank you so much for your lessons and your story, and I can't thank you enough for the vulnerability you've shared on my show here today. This has been a very impactful, and this is going to go on and touch thousands of lives of men around the world. So it's been my honor here sharing this time with you.
Thank you, Andrew. Like I said when we started, I really, really admire what you're doing with this program, and I think it's absolutely awesome, and it's going to be absolutely huge. And so, yeah, I can't thank you enough for having me on as a guest.
Thank you for listening to the Knowledge for Men podcast. Hundreds of interviews and 1 million downloads later, we're continuing to build an international movement, and we've just started. So if you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and leave a review in iTunes. It really helps to grow the podcast. Guys, 2015 is the official year of living with purpose, where every day you do only the things that matter to you. You wake up, live with purpose, and take massive action towards the life you want. Check out kfmfree.com to get free tools I've created to help you crush life. Again, that's kfmfree.com. This is your host, Andrew Farabee, and I'll see you in the next episode.